And, okay, so after Gabriel, first I'd like to give the opportunity to Professor Gabriel to allow to, he had raised his hand before, and actually, this issue about national security, I think that brings up the topic of adaptation. I think not enough has been spoken about this topic, and actually connecting the dots from the difference between mitigation and adaptation, in the sense that mitigation is about reducing emissions and trying to slow down the impact. But the fact is part of the impact is inevitable, and it will continue to happen. And I think that's why today's topic on how do we manage adaptation in terms of emergency crisis management situations, how can we get better at that? How will the science play into it? And so that's why I think I'd like to hear from Professor Lau in terms of the importance of actually also the science to understand how bad can it be, because I think before you can plan what measures are needed, you kind of need to know the end point. How bad is the situation going to be? So perhaps if we can hear from Professor Lau.
Yeah, thank you, Jeannie. I'm Gabriel Lau. I'm one of these names supposedly in the room, so I have to say something. So I am a climate scientist. And if you were here yesterday, I talked about the attempt of the scientific community in communicating scientific information to the general public, to the policymakers and so on. I would like to receive comments from those of you on the receiving end, our targeted audience, as to how we are doing in communicating scientific knowledge to you. Are we completely off the mark? Are we giving you information that are not useful in your respective endeavors in energy and markets and security? Or are we missing something which is very obvious? Could you please, both the gentlemen on stage and also on the floor, tell me something about how we are doing? This is very important information for me, because as I was telling you yesterday, I'll be going on to Kunming next week, which is the start of the next assessment cycle of IPCC. And that meeting would basically set the tone and the style and the content of the next report, which will be due in 2013. And any comments from you will be very, very helpful to me, and I'll report them to the bigger group. Thank you.
Great, thank you.
Thank you very much. And I've been personally following the developments in the scientific community on this for nearly all 30 years, and Shell has as well. And it's been very instructive, and we've always learned from the signals that have come out of the scientific understanding. And also, as the consensus has grown from a minority view back in the late 70s to a majority view now, which is significant. I think we see in maybe the next 5 years, maybe the next 10 years, a predictable discontinuity arising. And that's because currently the scientific community, which is an important constituency, is seeing that the hard truth of the environmental stresses is getting harder. That in fact, the relationship between emissions or deforestation or whatever and the impact on the climate is looking ever more worrying. At the same time, we see a global general public whose appetite for this topic is diminishing. So you cannot have these two constituencies diverging sustainably. And so there will be a clash. What the outcome of that clash will be and what the timing of it will be, I don't know. But I think it is important that that clash and that coming together occurs earlier rather than later. So I would ask the scientific community to be as outspoken as possible and to be as clear as to what the main lines are, rather than getting lost in a nuance which is secondary in getting the messages across.
Just to add one thing, and that is, I spend most of my time with high-level policymakers, and there is a lot of confusion. There is so much happening so fast. And there are people policymakers who, with all good intents, are really are really believing they know what should be done and a priority, but it's already, things are moving so fast. And I don't know what you all can do. It's not a criticism. It's kind of a plea that because the policy community leadership is so overwhelmed, including with information, and things are changing so fast. I don't know what you can do. I'm not saying you could do something better, but I'll tell you, there's a significant amount of confusion, especially when it comes down to setting priorities.
Okay, I did see 3 hands come up on this side, and I know Peter's dying to probably respond to that.
Very quick to that.
Okay.
I'm on the board of Global Reporting Initiative, so it's part of our job to deal with communication. Now, I put the analogy that as a professional accountant, I sometimes have to write a 20-page letter, and I apologize. Sorry, I do not have the time to write a 1-page letter, and I think that is the problem. It is very confusing, lots of contrary arguments. We heard the discussion, and I think they're more or less agreeing with each other, but you heard the flag. Now, to the general public, they're totally confused. So please tell us not more than 1 sentence what the problem is. Please.
Okay, any more feedback for Professor Lau? Specifically? Okay, Mark first, and then Robert. Oh, okay. Mark first, and then Robert.
I would say that actually, I think that climate science has a bit of a problem at the moment, and I think Jeremy makes the point, and I think things like Copenhagen COP15 probably didn't help the situation in terms of how the IPCC has been viewed and how certain governments use that as a blocking tactic, as a tool to try and throw some confusion out there. And the situation with the University of East Anglia as well compounded the situation. I think is a little bit like our own industry. There's a very powerful story to tell from IPCC around climate and the urgency of the challenge, but somehow that's been lost in the noise and it's been politicized. And very quickly, I think climatologists need to get the story straight. And as other people have said, we need to understand what the problem is. It needs to be communicated in a way that ordinary people really understand, and that needs to go right across, right across the globe, as it were. So I think it's a question of messaging. It's a question of trying to be as robust and as agreed on the science as quickly as we can, because there is some uncertainty out there. But there's no doubt that, like I said, I think we are reliant, and certainly we as an industry, are looking and are listening to what IPCC and eminent climatologists are trying to tell us. But it's difficult to try and interpret some of those messages. But most importantly, I think for the people of the globe, it's important that we actually get those messages out there. So some good communication strategy is required, and urgently.
Okay, and Robert. Okay, so I have 2 more later on. Okay.
Robert Gibson. There seems to be a disconnect between what's being said about the urgency and the speed with which things are moving and the speed with which the IPCC moves. I think the IPCC still seems to be moving at the same speed it always has, very due and deliberate, and I can understand the importance of that. But I do wonder whether we as a community should be adding to its resources so that it can move faster, so that if, for instance, there's important scientific work which it would help to accelerate the peer review, there is money to assist with accelerating that process so that there is more resources in terms of allowing it to communicate properly. Also, in terms of the review process at the end, whether that shouldn't become more of a judicial type of review and less of a political review.
Okay, and I have 2 more questions. One on the far side of the room, on the right-hand side. There. Pass the mic. I mean, I know from a scientific perspective it's always quite difficult because it's not absolute. Science is never absolute. And I think one of the issues that academics have a problem with trying to convey is that when the world demands certainty, but science is not certain. And so I think that's something that you're going to have to come to grips with, is how to communicate that. Yes.
My name's Liam Salter. I'm the CEO at Reset Carbon. Look, we're a professional carbon management services company. We don't have any problem communicating the science to our clients and our stakeholders. It's time to give the scientists a break, I think. They're not PR people. And I think where we're seeing the distortion of the message, it's actually from the politicians, and it's actually also from the companies. If you look at the positions of trade associations, for example, they are compromised. So actually they get very clear science in. The membership discusses the clear science. They have a variety of commercial interests. That what comes out of the trade association in terms of a perspective on the science is not a scientific perspective. So I think there's a big responsibility for the people that interpret what scientists say and do to communicate this more clearly to their own stakeholders. I'm not impressed by the way that the private sector likes to push this back to the scientific community, kind of ignorant of the way that they themselves are reflecting the opinions of the scientific community. And as I say, when my team comes to do an analysis of the science and figure out how to communicate this to our stakeholders, we don't find it very difficult. The numbers are pretty clear, the main impacts are pretty clear, the costs are pretty clear. So I don't think it's that hard to interpret.
Okay, was there anything else? Alexis?